Hi. Remember me? I'm the guy who didn't like Sunday in the Park with George.
Musical theater mash.
I don't know where to start. A couple Sundays ago, as a part of Sondheim September, I made the then very innocent-seeming choice to sit down and watch Sunday in the Park with George for the first time.
I've never watched Sunday in the Park with George.
It's a musical I have an actually pretty good knowledge of, having never actually sat down and watched it or sat down and listened to it. And I was interested to experience it. Sunday in the Park with George holds a very interesting place in the meta-analysis of Stephen Sondheim, like scholarly Sondheim studies. His books are named Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat. All sorts of articles and journals and books about him use the art creation in Sunday in the Park with George as a metaphor for Sondheim's artistic endeavors, which, even before I had watched the musical, struck me as a little odd, because there are so many other musicals that are so much closer to his experience. He's been on record numerous times saying, oh, none of his songs are autobiographical, and the one that comes closest is Opening Doors for Merrily We Roll Along, a show about someone who writes musicals. So why people keep latching on to Sunday in the Park with George as the Sondheim show when you talk about Sondheim analysis struck me as odd and was reason enough to be interested in watching this musical. The other reason I wanted to watch Sunday in the Park on my channel is because I've noticed people have very polarized opinions about Sunday in the Park with George. Some people absolutely love it and it is their favorite musical in the world, and some people find it the most boring, uninteresting thing in the world. And so I knew whatever my opinion on it was going to be, it was going to be a little divisive, which, for better or for worse, is productive on YouTube. People like vehemently agreeing or disagreeing on the internet. If you don't believe me, check the comments on my Miscast Mrs. Lovett video, or my Miscast Mame video, or that Sunday in the Park with George video. I watched it, I didn't like it. I showed you that. You've seen all that. There's a part of that recording session you didn't see, because it's uninteresting. It's minutes and minutes, teetering on about an hour of me just like this. Just watching. And so perhaps this was the wrong form to experience this musical through. It was a bit much for one sitting. And that was the suggestion I got throughout the comments. The number one suggestion. Watch it again. Listen to it again. This is a musical that takes multiple sittings. I have to pause here for a second because this is something I am constantly conflicted about. On the one hand, I run a musical theater YouTube channel. I'm the kind of guy who absolutely will go and watch a musical again and listen to it until the CD has burned through so much that it's transparent. On the other hand, I hold true that any good musical should be accessible, interesting, and able to get 80% of its point across in a first viewing, because that is the musical's primary form. People who are viewing it for the first time. Sunday in the Park with George is not a musical that has its full effect in the first viewing, and I can't forgive it for that. I think there are ways to communicate this message that the show is trying to communicate that would be accessible to someone who has never heard of the show and is just seeing it for the first time. That's how a musical should work. But I'm skirting around the point. What is the message of Sunday in the Park with George? Why write this musical? Sondheim calls it one of his most ambitious ambitious musicals in reference to what they are trying to capture and tell the audience. He explicitly says that in Finishing the Hat or Look I Made a, whichever one. And so you know there must be something there to grasp. When I moved to Denver about 2 months ago, something I was super excited about was having an artist space of my own. Just not like a studio, not like a room, just a little corner where I can set up my drafting desk and be in my own little mind and work on my stuff. Whatever that stuff may be. That's why we're here. That's why it's a mess. Normally I clean when I make videos, but I wanted you to see where I work in hopes that it will add some credence to the, I think, kind of bullshitty things I'm gonna follow it with. I understand the varied messages of Sunday in the Park with George really, really well. Like, I get it. There's not something that's going over my head. There's not something that I just can't decipher the meaning behind. Take the big one, Finishing the Hat. The artist caught in his hobby, unable to appreciate the world beyond, you know? As someone who has ditched out on numerous social occasions this month in order to make top 10 videos featuring Angela Lansbury and Stephen Sondheim to share on the internet, I get that I have to finish the hat. I understand that. And I understand the difficult way you have to try and communicate that to people who aren't stuck in your head. And I also understand Dot's perspective from the outside, how looking at the artist and unable to understand why this hat, this whatever the thing is so important to them. I understand the discussion between work and art, and work is something you do for other people, but art is something you do for yourself, maybe, until art becomes your work, and then you have no more lines to there aren't even lines to blur anymore. I understand that you leave the artist for the baker because the baker bakes bread and you can't eat paintings. Guess what? You can't eat YouTube videos either. Like, I get it. And I mentioned this in the video, that there's a fear there.
You're worried that you might see yourself in the art and that'll cause your whole existence to implode upon itself.
How there's something a little debilitatingly terrifying about the expectation of seeing yourself in the art commentary art piece that you're watching. It's, you know, it's like watching your whole world collapse in on itself into this one little black hole of an existence. It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with mentally. And so I put up the video. I expected it to get a lot of the reactions it did. And it got the big, watch it again, listen to it again. So I did. I've been watching this musical and listening to this musical for about 2 weeks straight now. I know this musical very, very well. I still don't think I like it. But hold on, don't comment yet. Don't click that dislike button yet. There's still more I got more to say. Technically, it is a brilliant musical. It has some of the most beautiful Sondheim songs I've ever heard. I've known that since even before I listened to the musical. It is a well-purposed and a well-structured musical for the most part. I'd say there are some things to be improved upon about the jarring transition between past and present, but that's commentary that other people have had too. I'm not saying anything new there. I have no qualms with the musical as a musical. I just don't like it. And it's hard to articulate why. It has something to do with how much I feel I relate to it. It has something to do with the fact that I feel like I have an understanding of the subtlety of it from the very beginning, and then it just seems like a long 2.5 hour belabored point that I already got. It's also because it scares me and it is difficult to watch. And I enjoy watching challenging things. This one strikes very close to home for me. And this is fine. This is all fine. And don't take it from me.
I never take into account an audience as, in terms of whether they like or dislike something, because you cannot make 1,000 different people all have the same opinion, but as to whether it's clear what you're telling them. But that's what you do for an audience, really. You lead them by the hand into the garden, and then they can save the flowers, or they don't like the flowers, but you gotta take them into the garden.
And it's all very layered and deep, because the fact that I don't like this musical makes me like it in a weird, backwards sort of meta-analysis kind of way. People always talk about representation on stage. You want to see varied people's stories on stage. And I think this is why the meta-analysis of Stephen Sondheim has circled around Sunday in the Park with George as its font of metaphors. Because while this is not an explicit story of Stephen Joshua Sondheim's experience, it is his metaphorical story. It is his representation on stage of art as he sees it, in a very visceral and multifaceted and important way. There aren't other art analysis pieces like Sunday in the Park with George. And this is awfully self-indulgent, and I hope you'll pardon it, but in the same way, I see representation of a lot of my own struggles on stage in Sunday in the Park with George. And I don't like that. It's challenging. It's difficult to watch. You know, it would be in the same way as if someone stood in the middle of the stage and took out your diary and just started reading it page by page. You know how it's gonna end. You know everything that's in there. And so you don't want to sit through it. And that's the struggle. Sunday in the Park with George has what feels like a happy ending, but lacks, you know, those really concrete answers that I want. It has these abstract metaphorical answers like, move on, you know, as long as it comes from you, then it will be new. And I get that. I get that too. I've been aiming for that all the frickin' time. But those answers don't help quell the vampires in the back of my mind, if I may borrow a metaphor from another unrelated musical. So yeah, sorry if this was long-winded. Sorry if this was a little disappointing, if you went into this expecting completely revamped opinions. My opinion hasn't changed that much. Sunday in the Park with George is still a musical that I just really, I don't like, but I kinda like that I don't like, if that makes any sense. Who knows? I'll see you later.